Hello, everybody. My name is Teva, and here today in Gimbal Labs, we are joining another book club session. And today's topic is fractal. But before fractals, and before we go into that topic, let's remind ourselves how do we run this stuff. So, welcome to Emergent Strategy Book Club, hosted by LockSync and Gimbal Labs, and our friends here, as you can see, in the call with us. If you're interested in more of these conversations we have in previously or in future, there will be a playlist on the YouTube. Book club rules. Everyone is welcome to participate or simply listen. There is a Zoom link, I assume, with that under description in the YouTube to join in the future sessions. And we will honor the 1 hour meeting length by shifting the conversation to next most elegant steps in the last 10 minutes. So 15 minutes of a chapter of a book, and we get everybody's insight into it. And before we finish, we also think about how do we take this information to the next level by thinking what are the next steps. We will keep the Zoom meetings open after 1 hour for anyone who wants to stick around and continue the conversation. And we also have breakout rooms if some brilliant idea is popped up in a mind, but the conversation needs to flow in the main meeting, they can join into the breakout rooms. Everyone is invited to facilitate the meeting, and with this, you can see the upcoming meetings and facilitation calendar. Today, I took privilege to share about fractals, and also tomorrow. So you can see we have sessions on Wednesdays and Thursdays, different time zones, so that different people can join. They have a strategic like categorization too, where in the Wednesdays we do focus on building communities, and on Thursdays we focus on tokenomics and how could we leverage the new Cardano technology for the benefit, and looking through the lens of Emergent Strategy book. Meeting notes. So if I zoom out a little on the mirror board, you can see previous sessions, starting from the introduction, how do we get this thing going, and some protocols, some ideas, how do we make this a best possible practice we are doing here. And we have our next steps also written below here. If we move to the right, you will see the most, you will move toward the most recent sessions and the meeting sessions related to that. One elegant step I would already add is to every page have a YouTube link of where the session happened. So if person wants to see where the sessions came from, it would give some link to watch from. Did I do it well? Because now I arrived to the today's session.
Beautiful. Thanks, Teva. Yeah, beautiful.
Today I prepared a little a rundown about the math and fractal, like where is the fractals coming from. The resources I'm using from, you can see from bottom corner, I added a YouTube link where I took the main resources and some other supporting information if you're interested to go into more detail. But that is simply a background knowledge. So when we look at geometric measures, and when you zoom in, for example, into a triangle, then the shape doesn't change. It always, the context will be lost. But what makes fractal unique is if you zoom into a fractal, then the pattern continues. And if you zoom into even more to that fractal, it continues even more. So the zoom out and zoom in resembles the whole of the object. And there is at this, I don't know when was that done, but it started from France, and there there are like many other ways to measure fractals, and one popular method I noticed what was most used was yardstick method. Basically, the idea is that you, for example, here is a fractal corner of like a small pyramid, and then you split it into you split this like one measure into three, and then it will keep the shape. And then if you have a fractal and you want to measure it, for example, you have four length fractal, then you're able to kind of draw out the pattern and see where it repeats. And if you kind of make all of these lengths like triple, like smaller, like 3 times, then you're more accurately able to measure. And if you would now vision yourself this new clock and doing it more 3 times, you will then cover even more like the nuances of the fractal. And one interesting thing, what now also was added to the fractals was our randomness. And this now gets to the topic where we are going with the Emergent Club, is that even if you introduce randomness, it still resembles the original model. So for example, there is a fractal called Fock curve. And if you add the randomness, then it's still somewhat similar, although you can see it's not that accurate, but the random is in a way that if the infinity is reached, it's still somehow kind of zoomed out version looks like the original pattern. So if you run the simulation like a million times, your average is like actual the original pattern. And this information I all gave you is simply to understand that this is a re-emerging pattern, and what we want to look from our like relationships or stuff, and what the book also talks about is applying patterns from your life. So I took one like quote from Rook: when we speak of systemic change, we need to be fractal. Fractals, a way to speak of the patterns we see, move from micro to macro level. And then there was a bunch of examples of patterns you could find out, like burnout, overwork, underpay, personal drama, disrupting movements, organizational movement splitting, mission drift, especially in direction of money, and stagnation and an inability to make decisions. And now we reach to the point of today's our collaborative thinking of our stories. What are our stories where we see pattern in building communities or our relationship or projects? And I thought I start off with one of the examples which I saw as a starting point from community building, which is actually quite related to Catalyst Fund 1 when I first time saw and James and actually John is here and Steve is here. So few people joined in to a funding opportunity, and the idea of new governance method and new protocol to design our tools which allow transfer value without like a middleman of trust. You trust the protocol. And through Fund 1, this pattern of seeing the similar people joining in continue through different funds. There are more people joining in, some people leaving, but that over fund, it just kept building that one book club and that one meeting. And then at times it just went to peak that it had to split. Then different communities started building, WADA and Kimba Labs and Swarm and Little Fish and AIDA, and there's corn mice here. And there is even more than I can now even mention these names, because it just keeps like building, and people in and leaders of these and the participants of these communities, they inherit the same values of collaboration, which is also a pattern which I noticed from the first time we saw each other, and it just keeps going to the next iterations, and therefore it's a nice pattern to see from emerging from one spot and going beyond. And even if we go now even like before Fund 1, probably the people who came up with Innovation Fund or to create this, they also came with a set of principles we have now to how to foster collaboration and looking to answer to questions and getting that kind of team together and that kind of funding together to make space for this explosion which we are feeling right now. So yeah, I hope this small introduction of the pattern I noticed of building communities gave you some ideas of how that could be, and then share your sticky notes around here or in next or in the on the right side. And to question, basically we're answering this: what is your story or pattern you have noticed that related to your surrounding communities, your projects, or your lifestyle? Because we have previously also heard people talk about how they changed some of the things they do, some random element happened, but some pattern still continues. And where do you see your pattern, for example, lifestyle? And you can use the Emergent Strategy Book Club, like these yellow sticky notes, to also get some ideas where to start from. I give you a few minutes to drop in some stickies, and then we randomly start picking them up. People can share stories. And just to be aware, this is the only question I prepared for today. So I was assuming this is enough for a 1 hour call. And yeah, you can drop in messages in Zoom and I copy over them to Mara if you don't have access to Mira or it's too clunky for you to access from whatever device you're using. And James, it would be good if you could lock this bar, the background.
Oh, gotcha.
All right, there is 3 hours of stories already on board, so I was thinking, in order to increase the randomness, I'm gonna drag everything in one spot, shuffle them around in weird ways, and then it's just
Genius.
I'm waiting for Dan to finish. And let go of your
Don't wait for me. Don't wait for me. I'm still formulating it.
Okay, then you are on pedestal. Just I'm just gonna drag some stuff. Oh no, there is okay. Some is grouped. I guess one specific person. Shuffle them in, and let's see what happens. All right, let's use that.
That's a kind of cool Miro function to shuffle.
Yeah. Probably there is actually a shuffle button somewhere somebody has made, but I just came up with this right now. Okay, let's start with I like the most middle, so let's go with this. My internal state is often reflected in my day-to-day experience in community. Who was the winner? Lucky draw. And can you
That was me. I put that in just because I was recently, as in the last few months, been really paying attention to what's going on internally as well as out there. And I've been noticing a lot of parallels. And so that's given me the kind of motivation to do a lot of reflection and internal work over the holidays. Just under the theory that if I want to make change in the world, I need to start inside myself. And that isn't some like positive thing. I change myself and then it changes my interactions and then that changes the world. It's more and more literal that me and the world are so intimately connected in one that I can't change the world out there unless I change stuff here at the same time. So if I want to see positive change out there, I need to make positive change inside. It's kind of my experiment right now. And I'm stating that as a theorem, saying that's kind of my stake in the ground. And if that's true, what do I need to do what does that cause me to actually do in my own life, in my own community, in my own family, in my own kind of personal friend relationship group? Like if there's stuff going weird or wrong or unfinished, it's going to translate out into the greater work that I want to do. So that's kind of why I put that there. And that relates to the fractal piece, is that everything is reflected up from microcosm to macrocosm.
Pattern starts from within and extends to community. Is that a good way to put it? Right. Let's take another one from, okay, let's take this big chunk. Somebody just made it easy to pick. Influence, generational conflict, patterns of thought, a thought fractal, a physical fractal, like a format of protocol, and then randomness and expectation, I guess.
Well,
maybe acceptation is also a word, but I don't know what that means.
yeah. I just learned this word, acceptation, and that might be beneficial. I'm just reading from the Wikipedia. It describes a shift in the function of a trait during evolution. For example, a trait that can evolve because it served one particular function, but then subsequently it may come to serve another. Acceptations are common in both anatomy and behavior. So the example of this, I don't know, is that interesting to anyone?
Sure is.
It looks direct adaptation, right? So like finding another use for it.
Yeah.
That sort of takes the current paradigm at face value. It's like they've only discovered things in the order they were looking for them. So to say that one thing was evolving here, then got used over there, might be ignoring the fact that there might be a bigger pattern, which is what that Levine guy was all about. A precursor electric pattern to the physical behavior or the physical outcome of the biology. So just because they didn't notice the pattern doesn't mean it wasn't there before the exaptation idea. Anyway. So.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting thing because it does. It is it's kind of non-sequential because typically adaptation and I think of generations and as like fractalness. That's why it sort of makes sense here, I think. But you think of adaptation as sequential. It's like, oh, over generational time. But the exaptation, I guess, is how dinosaurs flew. There was just a random thing for like flappy skin flaps, like and they would run and jump. And if they had these little skin flaps, they could kind of soar. And then that led to, that sort of, well, the skin flaps evolved for one reason, but then they were used for flight. So it's like it's kind of a mind-blowing thing that flight became kind of out of this randomness of what we developed became useful in some other thing. It kind of jumps trait, lineage, I guess.
And if you look at fish too, much the same way. Like they would evolve fish. Much wider. Flying fish?
Oh, right.
Yeah. They have like a wider wingspan adaptation that would be more effective for longer flights out of water.
And then it was just a survival, a survival trait that then, propagated because of, longer survival, stuff. From my rudimentary understanding of genetics.
I don't know. When I've been on a boat, and it's happened a few times that I've been on a boat in the Atlantic, and the flying fish come around, I don't see any function other than fun. Right? I don't know what they're doing. It looks like they're having fun.
They definitely would enjoy it.
That's the kind of
too boring.
I want to be involved in. We developed this just simply out of fun, and then it became, a genetic advantage, to pass on genes and sort of get involved in this big fractal thing of, evolution. It seems like it's just the whole idea of a fractal. This other part in there was the protocols. It's like, is a protocol a fractal? Maybe not, but it's sort of, that was what I kind of got into. It's just like, if we want to have a repeating pattern, and where does that, and what supports that pattern? Like if there's a pattern happening, we can kind of look to the landscape or the context. For instance, another thing that another idea that just came about was that physical water, has just a couple of, has a many traits, but one thing is that it goes downhill and it doesn't move in a straight line. So that's sort of, those are the two traits. And out of that, like these incredible patterns happen. So it's just like a fractal pattern, a repeating pattern. We can kind of break it down, or possibly we can look to the context of that pattern and how it's propagating and the forces that drive it. These are just some thoughts. But that's my story of fractals.
But I think, Newman, it's not an answered question about, I think it's an answered question that the protocol is designed to be a fractal.
Okay.
What's not clear is what's going to happen. Like they know they can adjust this, which will affect that. but over the long term, they don't really know how to play out. You know, like the randomness factor in stake pools getting chosen for a given block.
Right.
It's not, you know, what has it been, like 20 or 26 months, 28 months since the protocol's been running. It's not clear the lower saturated pools that are occasionally getting blocks. It's not, you know, like I think just a couple of days ago, I saw that 25 stake pools retired in one day.
Oh,
Right. So, you know, is that their fault? Is that the randomness factor not working for them well enough? Did they have too little pledge? Or did
right.
they have good pledge but not enough delegation? You know, like there's, you know, somebody needs to study that. I think probably some people are studying that, but these are questions that haven't been answered yet in terms of this fractal, what the Cardano protocol is.
I think it's back
You
to
know,
the what emergent behavior is. Like, you notice emergent behavior after it's happened, whereas a fractal, you know roughly where it's going because of an equation.
Or that you can
predict what behavior is going to come, really.
right. So a predictive pattern fractal or a descriptive pattern fractal. Like we can describe a pattern, you know, stake pools all ended, and then if we see that in another 26 months they either grow or decline, or so we can describe a pattern, and then if we use that description to predict like a future or predict what had happened in the past, like this is
you can't
do things. No,
it's more like chemistry. You know you can put this much of solution A in and this much of solution B, and you know at some point roughly after you mix them it's going to become this thing, but you can't pick any one voxel in that jar and say that's going to become this compound. So
right.
emergent technology and emergent behavior patterns, you can only set the conditions for it to occur in, knowing that it will occur. So if you define the domain more tightly but leave the rules really loose, then you know something's going to happen in that realm. You just have to create the box that realm is happening in.
I wonder if you do it for stake pools, and then it may actually not have a pattern, but once you put it in a dashboard and you say, I think I saw a pattern, that creates a pattern, because now people are assuming this is a pattern and they will repeat it because it's like the contagion.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, it is more like than a pattern that you can predict. So like if the issue is some smaller stake pools aren't getting enough opportunities, then like cancerous growth, you have to put controls on the expansion that you can see happening rather than try and create a change to benefit the smaller guy. Like you create a limit on how much any one stake pool can eat. That makes sure that there's enough left over for everybody else.
Right. How to manage the complexity, how to manage these fractal patterns, knowing that they are fractal in nature, meaning that if you change one at one scale, it's just going to repeat at another, or like how do you manage
biological mechanism? Like why do you breathe? You've got a carbon dioxide sensor in your carotid artery that says, not enough here, better do something. And it just triggers that one little function. So we have like environmental sensor. So stake pool, when it gets too big or past a certain growth area, then we limit. Say, okay, you had enough. That's as big as you get. Otherwise, you're going to become cancerous.
Right. And that's biomimicry, right? That's sort of looking into biological systems, natural systems, to figure out like how they do this management stuff.
You could call it that, or it's recognizing the human biological quality of the Cardano blockchain.
That
so
too.
Comparing it to nature, I mean, I'm in the bandwagon that cancer is just a normal cell. You know, it's the same cell as every other cell, but it's lost its communication or its sync with the rest of, you know, its surrounding environment. It no longer gets the instructions sent to it on what its purpose is, and then it's passing off that lack of instruction to the next cell, which creates cancerous growth. So if the problem is not maybe less of how much resources they have access to, it's more that they've lost sight of their instruction. How could that be related to this? Just curious.
Because there is a bioelectric network that goes throughout the organism, and the cancerous cell has decided to stop listening to what's around it to know what it ought to be, because the cells around it kind of more or less tell it what to be. So once it ignores everyone around it, then it treats the entire surroundings like resources for itself alone. It just consumes, and it devolves, like you're saying, into a cell that's despecialized to a degree and just grows and grows and grows. It consumes all the resources around it. And depending on the type, it's able to create venous networks that feed it even more strongly. But that's that same reaching out. There's your fractal behavior right there. That initial cell reaching out for little resources turns into a larger agglomerated cell that has vessels and nerves feeding it. So there is an analogy, I think, to having stake pools that get too big or grow too fast, perhaps, or have a certain type of membership, like a stake pool with lots of big wallets, maybe, might be another warning sign. But I think rather than trying to figure out a formula to give randomness to everybody equally, you might be better off with just having a random platform and then controlling the growth of the larger ones. Anyway, I don't know. I can't talk about stake pools, really. That's not my expertise at all, nor am I a biologist, but I've been just the fascinating research happening right now about how cells do just that, how they communicate and how they differentiate. And there's a guy that's sort of looks like he's getting to the point of unlocking it. And it has humongous implications, but he still treats it like some kind of Lego set rather than the spiritual picture that seems to be manifesting out of his experiments. But long story short, there seems to be a measurable, now that we have sensors fine enough to measure it, there is an electromagnetic precursor to the form that something will take. And before we were able to measure it, everyone just thought cells broke up and divided and became something. But now that they can measure it, the video that he shows in his presentations is remarkable. It's an embryo of a tadpole, and with these very fine sensors, they're able to see there's a flush. I call it the kind of the cosmic orgasm takes place, and you can see the facial features on the edge of the egg before any cells are broken or differentiated in that location. And eventually, that is exactly where the face shows up. It's pretty remarkable. But he's through that been able to trace back a communication network between cells and control them using sodium ion channel blockers and control how cells differentiate. And in terms of biological stuff, there's very few rules compared to the complexity of the organisms. And that is what emergent behavior is all about, I think. You have a series of potential events in a playing field, and then some of them group together and become something on their own. That's the emergent quality. So trying to predict it, I think, won't ever really work out well, other than to create the environment like a beaker for a chemistry metaphor that I was using before.
Right. I have a question about fractals. Although two fractals would be pretty much the same pattern, do you think they're exactly the same? You know, are just because they're two fractals, that means they are the exact same thing? Or are there intricate differences that we can find? Does that make sense at all? I'm only asking.
It's like pi.
When you
same fractal manifests the same way each time, right?
But also it is like a factor of external circumstances. So not every fractal goes there, although the overall pattern remains the same. Like there are still external circumstances that help grow the specific fractal. So they wouldn't, So if you keep magnifying it, it'll still like look the same pattern, but they won't it kind of like genes. When gene is copied from one cell to another, it doesn't copy the exact same way. There are like small differences in the way it's copied.
Only
Those,
if
like,
the randomness is included.
Yeah.
Where? Like in Mandelbrot sets, you'll get the same thing each time if you use the same precondition.
So there are
Oh.
styles of fractals. One are mathematical, and some which then the pattern is repetitive, and there are like different styles of that. But yeah, when you introduce randomness to fractal, then it creates all kinds of stuff. And when you take it from nature or from like real life, then there is no fractal that I know that has like repetitive, like it's always the same. It always has introduced some different effect.
Yeah, it's like moire pattern, kind of, like in terms of fractal, looking at biology and nature. There are fractals, more or less, because things operate similarly in macro and micro scales. That's evolution working efficiently,
On the sources, there is I've added a link of one researcher who just made a bunch of different fractals, and they have their own names, so you can see where they come from. And some are repetitive, and some have like, randomness.
A lot of nature is with limits. There's been a lot of study from a long time ago. Things can only grow past a certain point, but you'll notice all the species within that type fit within that limit. So getting back to conditions, like tuning the outer conditions of a situation rather than trying to predict which one is going to become the thing you want.
I noticed nice big words here. One is religion, and one is all existing philosophies. I would like to hear, if we have like 5 minutes, about who wrote the religion and what's the story about that. Where is the fractal pattern?
I wrote religion, and I think it kind of grows like fractals because there's an ideology and communities form around it, and then the ideology moves to another place and another group of community forms around it. Although on a larger scale they look similar, but if you go in, there tend to be like little differences in the way they form around the exact same philosophy. So that is why I was curious about if they could be different in real life.
I see now that they are a pattern. And
yeah, that's really funny you say it that way, Harsha. There's been this strange video being recommended to me on Amazon Prime, and it's about Mennonites, this very conservative religious group. And the guy who produced the video came out of that upbringing. And so to explain his process, he goes back to the beginning of it, and how the Anabaptists in Switzerland they were murdered for believing differently about baptism than the rest of the people. And, and like the current group of Mennonites in the United States are just as dogmatic as, like the three previous, there were like 3 breaks religiously that created this current group of Mennonites in the United States. And at every break, they were so dogmatic that it was murder, or just as bad as murder, what they did to the people who wanted to believe differently. And the people now are that dogmatic, and it's a crazy kind of repetition that produces growth when people realize how oppressive their ideologies become, but they somehow are unable to avoid the ideological cement that they end up living in, and that's a really fascinating thing. Even though they know their history, they stay ideologically, in concrete.
Yeah, I agree. Like fractals can like expand like in a good way or bad way, just like Om spoke about cancer, and it could be the other way as well. So yeah, that makes sense.
I promised at the start that one sticky is sticking out of these stickies. So then life patterns repeat very much the way fractals do, unless you make a change or circumstances force a change on you. Share your story.
This kind of follows on from what Harsha was saying about religion and religious doctrine and following a particular way of life. The reason I wrote that is because hang on, where am I now? 12 years ago, I had a heart attack, which was not a fun thing to happen, and that forced a change in my lifestyle. I quit smoking for a start, which I should have done years before. But it also made me look at how I was working, how much I was working, the stresses I was under whilst working. So that forced a change on me. But life's patterns, the reason I said that they're like fractals is because it's very easy for the old patterns to creep back and repeat themselves. And that's exactly what I found happening. And I think one of the things with emergent technologies and emergent patterns is we're dealing with new stuff. So we don't have the patterns at the moment. It's like looking at, well, take the fractal example. It's like looking at a new fractal for the first time and zooming in and seeing the pattern and going, hey, that's pretty. So that's kind of where I've come from. And most of you know I live on a canal boat in the UK. And that again, that was a very conscious decision. I decided that I'd had enough of what I was doing. I'd fallen back into the old patterns of working too hard, not paying enough attention to myself. And I figured, listen, I'm 60 now. If I don't do it now, it's never going to happen. So we bought the boat a year ago, and yeah, changed the pattern.
And I don't want to point fingers, but you're sitting in front of your computer for at least a few hours a day.
Yeah, but okay. We go back to where I started out my working life. Well, let's go even further back to computers. When I was a kid at what's called secondary school, I guess in America, is it senior school? It's where you go after once you're that little bit older and they start teaching you serious subjects and stuff. We had a dial-up link to a DEC PDP-10. I don't know, a few of you may have an idea of what they are. Some of you might not. So we had a dial-up link with a 110 baud modem, which would whistle away at you, and it was 10 characters a second. So then came the 6502, the 8086, the 80186, and all the micros. And I've had a fascination for computers and developing software. So yeah, sitting in front of a computer for a few hours, Steve, I agree with you. It's taking up my time, but this is something I have a passion for. It's something I started doing when I was in my early teenage years. I've always loved playing with computers. I've always loved the fact that you can tell them what to do and they'll do it. And if they don't, you debug it until it does.
Yeah, man, I don't want to give you shit about it. I wrecked my health in the 90s because of sitting there fucking around with Photoshop, you know, and swore I'd never do it again.
Yeah.
But crypto, like a different possibility, for the world and for me, compels me. But I got dogs now, which is its own fucking horrible mirror. And I have to walk them, so I do get more exercise than I did in the 90s. So
Yeah, good. We have 2 dogs, so I get out walking them. But then we're moving the boat around. That's physical. I chopped 2 trees down today, so we got some firewood to keep warm, because it's -4 Celsius, which is what, mid-20s Fahrenheit.
It's cold.
Yeah, a bit chilly. The canal's frozen. We can't move. Anyway, enough about me. There's hands up. So,
Well, I do think that that's an interesting discussion of, just because that's really the pattern that I'm trying to change in myself. And like Nori talks about, like, if you can change something in yourself, then it can propagate out into your communities. Like if we had a community that really did respect and called each other out, or however we establish the limits of, like, computer screen time. One thing about it is like sense making, of like being able to recognize, it's like, oh yeah, my body's changing. My eyes get tired, or my back hurts from sitting, or my hands hurt, or my neck hurts, or whatever it does, and being able to respond to that would be something that I want to do at all levels of my community involvement, from my cells in my body to my bioregion, and the planet, because I guess that's the big part of it, is that these things scale, right? That a movement scales down, scales up.
What I'm hearing from Dan, Newman, and Steve is that our next most elegant step is to go outside and take a walk.
Was just thinking the same. It would be so easy to stay here in front of the computer right now, but this is stopping meetings on time is one pattern that I would like to get better at. And so I was feeling it feels like a really compelling thing to practice, is sticking to those bounds so we can be outside exercising, doing everything else.
well, it's easy here because it's just coming up to 9 p.m., which is bedtime walks for the dogs. So I'll be out getting some fresh air.
They're going to tell you. Yeah.
Yeah, the little one normally runs up and tells me he hasn't yet, so I'm okay for a few minutes.
I have a very quick comment, if I could, if you don't mind, I hope.
Okay, sure.
The dawn of everything is telling us, showing a lot. It basically goes in the actual archaeological record. And if we're talking about religion, as we understand it, in our whole lifetime, it's a very recent concept. And previously, the recognition and following of patterns and our place in patterns was what we would then call religion, but it was how people lived. If they weren't worshiping a thing, they're recognizing their part in the pattern and being part of it, and using the pattern and understanding of the pattern to help guide their lives. It's a tremendously different idea than worshiping a thing and dedicating ourselves to one idea, or even worshiping nature, as we've been always taught that previous people did. So the fractal elements of observing natural patterns and looking at human behavior in a society and how to shape the society was something that they actively did. They shaped their societies based on human nature and how to work together in different places. So I definitely check that book out, The Dawn of Everything, as the big binding tie together for how we actually used to work with patterns in nature.
Oh man, we haven't talked about that one yet. Would love to follow up. There's a lot of critical points in there for us to keep in mind.
But technically, we reached the end of the workshop. If there are other more elegant steps, next steps you want to mention, you learn from this session, then let us know. It's just a teaser for the those people who are watching, tomorrow, 16 UTC, we will be counting on a question. What are the questions we should focus on that sets us into positive reinforcement pattern? Our book has given us a lot of guiding questions, but we may just come up with our own. Like the one which Newman pointed out today, is a protocol a fractal? Something we might need to look into to create a protocol for the tokenomics, or something which gives us this pattern. From here, I think I hand off the session to James to finish it up. And then
Awesome job.
Incredible, Tavo. Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. Yeah, I got nothing else to say. Thank you.
Is anyone sticking around?
I'll stick around if you're sticking around. I would love to dive into that, the religious talk. Yeah, I'll stick around for a bit.
I'm waiting to. This all feels really appropriate, so I'm around.
Awesome. Can I make you the host to keep it going? Cool.
Yeah, fun. I gotta go walk that dog.
Yeah,
Thank you all.
I'm going soon.
Do you guys want to keep live streaming, or should I cut the stream?
I think cut the stream.
Yeah, just wanted to ask.
So if it's about religion, cut the stream.
Oh man.
All right, you know where to. Oh, I can't cut it. You can now though, because you're the host.
Okay.
Next to the bottom bar, next to the whiteboard's icon, you should see some dots. You can turn it off.
See y'all.
Got it. Thanks so much, everybody. Looking forward to tokenomics.